My parents built a family rule that no one questioned for 15 years until a stranger at a bank asked why I was legally listed as my own sibling's guarantor. I still remember the exact moment everything started to unravel for me. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I walked into the bank to update my account details. I expected it to be routine, boring, and forgettable like every other banking errand I had ever done. Instead, the teller looked at my file, paused, and called for the branch manager. That pause was the first time I felt something was wrong in a way I could not explain. The manager arrived, scanned the screen, and asked me a question I did not understand. He asked why I was listed as the legal guarantor for my younger sibling's loan account. At first, I laughed because I thought it was a mistake in their system. But then he turned the screen slightly so I could see my own signature scanned into multiple documents. My stomach dropped in a way I will never forget. I told him there had to be an error because I never signed anything like that. He asked me to sit down before continuing the conversation. That was when I realized this was not a simple clerical mistake. It was something deeper and older than I could immediately understand. I had always trusted my parents completely, almost blindly, because of a rule they created in our household. They called it the family rule, and it controlled every financial decision we ever made. The rule was simple on the surface: never question family paperwork because parents handle everything for the future. I never thought to challenge it because it was repeated like a mantra for years. Every document, every form, every signature was handled by them without explanation. Even as I grew older, they insisted it was easier and safer this way. I thought it was just cultural trust and parental responsibility. But standing in that bank office, I felt that trust starting to crack. The manager asked me if I had ever co-signed anything for my sibling's education loan. I said no immediately because I had never even seen the loan documents before. He frowned and said my name appeared on every page as secondary guarantor. He also pointed out that the signatures matched my ID records perfectly. That was the moment I felt my sense of reality tilt. I asked to see the documents again, and my hands were shaking as I looked. There it was, my name printed clearly under legal guarantor sections I had never touched. My sibling's loan amount was larger than anything I had ever imagined. The bank officer then said something that made my chest tighten further. He said there were multiple accounts tied to my identity, not just this one. I felt like I was being pulled into a story that had started long before I noticed. I left the bank that day with copies of the documents and a headache I could not shake. On the ride home, I kept replaying every financial interaction in my family. My parents had always been strict about paperwork, especially anything involving money. They would say things like, "We handle it for you and don't worry about adult stress." At the time, it felt like protection, not control, but now it felt like something else entirely. When I got home, my mother was cooking dinner like nothing had happened. My father was sitting in the living room watching television, calm and normal. I placed the documents on the table without saying a word. The moment my father saw them, his expression changed slightly but quickly recovered. He asked where I got them and why I was digging into old matters. That question alone made my stomach sink even further. I told him the bank showed me everything. He sighed deeply and said I was not supposed to worry about those accounts. That sentence did not comfort me at all. It only made me more certain that something had been hidden from me. I pressed him harder and asked why my name was on legal financial documents. My mother finally turned off the stove and joined the conversation. She said it was part of a system they set up years ago for family stability. She called it structured responsibility sharing. I had never heard that phrase before in my life. She explained it like it was normal, like I should already understand it. According to her, families sometimes assign financial responsibility roles to avoid future chaos. I asked why I was never told about it. My father said it was because I was young when it started and it never changed. But I was not that young anymore, and I knew that explanation did not make sense. My sibling walked in during the argument and immediately sensed tension. They looked confused when I asked them about the loan. They said they always thought I was aware and involved. That was the first contradiction that made me feel truly sick. Everyone in my family seemed to believe a version of reality I was not part of. I went to my room that night unable to sleep. I kept staring at the bank documents spread across my bed. Every signature looked like mine, but I had no memory of signing anything. I started questioning my own memory in a way that felt disturbing. The next morning, I went back to the bank alone. I asked for a full transaction history and every linked account under my name. The new clerk hesitated before handing me additional files. What I saw next made everything even more confusing. There were accounts tied to my identity dating back over a decade. Some of them were opened when I was barely a teenager. That alone made no legal sense at all. I asked how a minor could open guarantor accounts. The clerk said it required parental authorization or legal guardianship. That word hit me harder than anything else so far. Guardianship implied something far more formal than a simple family arrangement. I asked if my parents had signed those documents. The clerk said yes, and that everything appeared valid in the system, but something about his tone suggested even he was unsure. I requested copies of the original applications. When I saw the handwriting on some of them, I recognized my father's signature. But I also saw something that did not match my expectations. Several forms listed me as both guarantor and emergency guardian for my sibling. It made no sense for one person to hold both roles without legal oversight. I left the bank feeling like I was holding a puzzle with missing pieces. That night, I decided to confront my parents again with everything I had learned. I laid all the documents on the dining table before dinner. My father looked at them and finally stopped pretending nothing was wrong. He told me to sit down because the situation was more complicated than I understood. My mother looked visibly nervous for the first time I could remember. He began explaining that years ago, the family faced financial instability. They said they needed a way to secure loans to keep everything afloat. According to him, banks required a strong guarantor profile for approval. He claimed they used my name because I had the most stable identity record. That explanation felt like a half-truth at best. I asked why I was never informed or asked for consent. He said I was a child and it was for the family's survival. That word again, survival, used like it justified everything. I asked why it continued into adulthood without my knowledge. My mother said they never saw a reason to change something that worked. That sentence made my anger spike in a way I could not control. I asked if they understood the legal consequences of what they had done. My father went silent for a long moment before answering. He said they believed it was all internal family structuring, not fraud. But I had already seen enough documents to know it crossed legal lines. The next day, I went to a different bank branch to verify everything independently. The officer there looked more serious and immediately flagged my file as unusual. He said my identity appeared linked to multiple dependent accounts across institutions. He also mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He said there were inconsistencies in how my signature evolved over time. It suggested someone else may have been replicating it under guidance. That implied ongoing forgery, not just a one-time mistake. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something criminal. I contacted a lawyer that evening, showing them all the documents I had collected. The lawyer's expression changed as he reviewed page after page. He told me quietly that this could involve identity misuse spanning years. He also said something even more unsettling. He said the structure looked like someone deliberately built me into a financial anchor. That meant my identity was used to stabilize loans for others repeatedly. I asked who benefited the most from that structure. The answer was obvious even before he said it. My family had been relying on my credit profile like a foundation, but I still could not understand how no one outside noticed earlier. The lawyer explained that long-term family-linked accounts often avoid scrutiny until a trigger event. The bank inquiry had likely been that trigger. I went home that night feeling like my entire life had been quietly edited. I looked at my sibling differently for the first time, not with anger, but with confusion and sadness. They had benefited from something I never agreed to, but they also seemed genuinely unaware of the full structure. That made everything more complicated emotionally. A few days later, the bank called me back urgently. They said an internal audit had uncovered irregular authorization chains. They asked me to come in immediately for clarification. When I arrived, a senior compliance officer was waiting. He told me they had traced the original setup of the accounts. He said the initial authorization documents were submitted through a legal intermediary. That intermediary was linked to my parents. He also said something unexpected had surfaced in the audit. Some of the earliest documents predated my awareness by years. They showed that my identity had been assigned financial roles before I understood any of it. That meant the system was not reactive. It was planned from the beginning. I felt my hands go cold as I listened. The officer then revealed a final detail that changed everything. He said my parents had structured the accounts during a period when they were restructuring debt across multiple institutions. They used my profile as a stabilizing anchor to avoid rejection. But they also layered my sibling into the same system to distribute risk. It was not just convenience anymore, it was strategy. A strategy built on my identity without my informed consent. I left the bank knowing I could no longer see my family the same way. That night I confronted them one last time. I asked them directly if they ever intended to tell me the truth. My mother started crying before answering. My father said they thought it would never come back to hurt me, but it already had in ways I was only beginning to understand. I asked them what happens now that everything is exposed. My father said they would try to resolve it with the bank system. but I already knew it was bigger than that. The damage had already been recorded legally and financially for years. As I sit here now writing this, I still do not know the full extent of what was done. But I know one thing with certainty. My name was not just part of my identity. It was turned into a tool in a system I never agreed to join. And the strangest part is realizing how long I lived inside it without ever noticing.